All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about how to set up parental controls on your Unifi Dream Machine. So let's jump in. And if you're new here, hi, this is Sonoran Tech, where we cover a wide range of tech topics from hardware to home labs to coding and current events. If you like the content, please hit the sub button and leave a comment to let me know what other topics you're interested in seeing. Now, if you're new to the Dream Machine, or I'll call it UDM from now on, or thinking about buying one, you may be surprised to find there's no parental control menus like you might find on other devices. And that's because the UDM is a prosumer/business device, and these features are not front and center, but the capabilities are built into the UDM, and they allow you to set up parental controls that are probably more powerful than many other offerings. So what we're going to do is we're going to organize this video in terms of parental control use cases and show you how you can set up those use cases on your Dream Machine. And before we jump into that, when you're thinking about parental controls, you have to keep in mind where the UDM fits into your household. Now, this is probably obvious to many of you, but I think when you're explaining parental controls outside like the technical group, they think there's like one solution for everything. And reality is there's so many components in a parental control setup that you need to understand how each device works and what its role is. So, of course, the UDM, it's a network device and it can only manage network operations. So this isn't going to stop your kids from running software that don't use the network. That may be obvious, but it's worth stating. Now, think about something like, maybe your kids are still running Windows 3.1 and they like to play solitaire all the time. Or, a bit of a joke, or like another game, at least I've seen around my household, is Geometry Dash. Doesn't seem to use the network at all. And, having controls set up on the Dream Machine is not going to stop that. It's not going to stop a process from starting on another device in a house. And that could be a mobile device, a PC, etc. And obviously, it's not going to do things like location-based tracking, geofencing, etc. How you configure your UDM is really just part of the overall parental control landscape. Now, before we really jump in, I just want to say I highly recommend creating a separate VLAN for your kids' devices, because some of the parental control features work best when you have a separate dedicated network for them. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this quickly, but for a deeper dive, I just did a video on learning about VLANs and another one on setting up VLANs on your Dream Machine, so check those out if you want to go a bit further. So before jumping into the use cases, here I am at my Dream Machine console, and let me just show you what it would look like if you want to set up a new network for your kids. So you go into Settings, you go into Networks, let's pretend none of this exists, and you would just click New Virtual Network, call it whatever. I'm going to call it my second kid's network. And you can go ahead and customize like the subnet you want it on. As I talked about in other videos, if you want to change the VLAN ID or a whole bunch of other settings, you can do that. But you would just go ahead and click Add, and now you have a second network. And of course, to get your kids' devices on that network, you then need to go associate this network with specific ports if they are using wire connections, but that's probably not a common use case. Typically, the next thing you're going to need to do is set up a new Wi-Fi SSID for them to connect to. So actually, let me just go back and I'll finish creating that network. So we have this new network, and if you want your kids' devices to be on the network, now you need to create a new SSID for it, and you'd say kids wireless net. And here you would say what network they would connect to, and you say kids network 2, and you would hit create. I'm not going to do that right now because that will actually cause a blip in my Wi-Fi network, and it's homework time and everyone will lose their minds. However, that is just a quick tutorial to set up a dedicated network for your kids and how to set up a dedicated SSID for them that their devices can connect to. And that'll make some of these features work a little better, or at least be less disruptive to other functionality in the house. So with that setup out of the way, let's jump into our first use case, which is how can you use the UDM to manage screen time? Now, managing screen time involves restricting network access at certain times and sometimes to certain programs, right? There's kind of two big buckets, and it's like managing screen time and like content filtering, and there are overlaps between them. If we want to talk about how to manage screen time, let's kind of walk through some of your options that the UDM offers you. Now, the first option for devices on a Wi-Fi network, and I'm going to go in and I will show you one of my kids' networks, is to use a feature called Wi-Fi blackout. And you can go into your Wi-Fi network configuration. Under advanced, you're going to have to click manual and go down to the bottom, And you can see right here, there's the Wi-Fi blackout scheduler. And of course, very helpful help. Specify times when this Wi-Fi instance should be disabled. You can turn this on, and now you can set an entire schedule. So let's just say I want this off from 5 p.m. to whatever, 12:30 a.m. Monday to Friday, right? There you go. You can set up a schedule. And what that will do is when Wi-Fi blackout is enabled, this entire SSID will just disappear. So all the devices connected to it, they won't even see it anymore. It'll go away. That's kind of a crude approach, but one way to schedule blackouts. You could imagine if you want their networks off at night, an easy way to make it go away. Now, I think a potential downside to this is if any devices have trouble like reconnecting to an SSID when it comes back, or for some reason, if you have to enter credentials again, if they're not cached, it could cause some blips. And of course, if you're using wired connections, this is not going to solve your problem completely. So this is one way to manage screen time and disable network access. Now, another way, and this is what I prefer, is to set up traffic rules. And so to do this, you go into settings, you go into security, you can do traffic and firewall rules. So let me walk you through a couple rules you could set up. And you can see I have a couple of kids rules already configured here, but I'm going to walk through a few examples. So one might be, hey, I want to turn off kids' access to the network at night. So what you would do is create a new rule, block night access, set the action to block. By the way, this is very important. It defaults to block. If you set up allow rules, you have to remember to do this. So you're going to block nighttime access. Now, you want to select the source of where the traffic is coming from. So this is going to be the devices you want to block. One way to do this, and this is my preferable way, is choose the network you want to block. So you could say all devices on the kids' network, I want to block. And that captures everything. Now, if you remember, just a few minutes ago, we set up a whole new network just for the kids. You put all their devices on it. Now everything becomes a whole bunch easier. So you can say, I want all devices on the kids' network to be blocked. Or if you don't actually want to do that, you can go down to this section and block individual devices. Now that would allow you to block devices across multiple networks if that's a use case you wanted. But for now, I'll just leave this set to kids, and then the destination you want is, I would just say internet, and then you can schedule it. So here you can set up a whole schedule for this. And if we want to do it at night, we can just say custom. We're going to do Monday through Thursday because we're nice, and we'll let everyone play games a little later in the week. Oh, we need Sunday too. And we can start this at, there you go, 22, and end it at 6 a.m., whatever. And you can add the rule, and then everything will be blocked. So that would allow you to block access to all the kids' devices at night. And now imagine you could set up a bunch of these. You're like, hey, I don't want access after school. I don't want access at dinner time between these hours. So you can imagine setting up a whole bunch of rules that solve this, and you would just add each rule for each use case you want, and you'll be off and running. And so these firewall rules are really your best lever for managing screen time overall. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how do I stop them from accessing TikTok or something like that? Don't worry, we'll get to that. I have that kind of covered under content restrictions. But before we close this out, one thing I want to say on managing screen time is, again, remember what this can and can't do. If you have their internet turned off, if you have like, hey, block kids at night and their internet goes off at night, smart kids are going to find a way around this, and you just need to be aware of that. So for example, if they have a phone, they can just turn off their Wi-Fi. And guess what? If you have cellular data coverage at your house, that's not going through your Dream Machine. And so that's completely outside of your control. So in that case, you would need some kind of parental control on the device to restrict that. And of course, like I said before, if there are apps running on any of these devices that don't require the network, turning off the network obviously is not going to solve the problem. So just be aware of that. So let's move on to how you can use your UDM to do content restriction. And this could be everything from blocking access to questionable websites like adult content, certain social media sites, whatever you want to do. Now, there's a couple options you have here with the UDM. And the first thing we're going to do is you can actually just turn on content filtering on the network, and it'll take care of it for you. So what you can do is, again, go to settings, open up the kids network, and you're going to need to go into the advanced manual configuration. And here you can see it has built-in content filtering. And you can see what it says is apply content filtering to your networks to block malicious, phishing, and adult sites. For more customizable content, create a traffic rule. And so you can set this to none, work level. So here, blocks explicit. I don't know if I can say that word, and malicious domains, search engines, and YouTube is set to safe mode, and then family. So really easy. Like a quick one is just come in here, enable this, click the button, and see what happens. Now, personally, I don't even know what this blocks, so I tend not to go with something where I don't understand it. I think this may work like for a day or two, but I think you probably want to quickly move past this and go back to setting up firewall rules like we just talked about, because that'll just allow you much finer grain control over content restrictions. So we'll go back to the old firewall rules section under security. Firewall rules. So now imagine we just want to block access to certain apps or websites. Very similar to blocking all internet access. So let's just say we'll set up this rule. So let's say there's a set of applications we want to block. Now this could be all the time. It can be on schedule. Again, that's your choice. So we'll just set up a rule. Again, we're going to set the source, and I'll choose the kids network. And like I said before, you can also choose individual devices if you want, or even multiple networks. By the way, at the beginning, when I said it's helpful to set up a separate network, you can see why. If you set up this rule and didn't have separate networks set up, you'd either be clicking each individual device, or if you didn't even want to do that, this rule would apply to all of your devices, which you may not want. So we'll say the source, and then here you can say the destination. You can block traffic going to a specific app or app group. Now let me show you something. So under app group, there's social networks, online games, instant messenger, et cetera, et cetera. So you can just go in and be like, hey, I just want to block access to all social networks. You can have multiple app groups. You don't need to make multiple rules for this. Social networks, online games, instant messaging, done. I want this off every day. And again, you can set up the schedule. Now, it is not clear what sites are being blocked within this, how often lists behind this are updated. So you may want a more finer grained control. And so that's where you can kind of go back and you can be like, you know what, I'm going to block a specific app. And now you can set a list of apps. So let's say, and this list is huge, by the way. So let's say we want to stop kids from using Discord because, you know, they're going to be on that all day. And so hey, I can pick Discord. I'll add that. And I don't know, what other games do they play? Everyone plays Roblox, right? We'll pick that. And how about Minecraft? We'll pick that. There you go. So this would allow you to set up rules to block specific games. Now, similarly, I'll just go back and create another rule. You could combine this into one rule. It really doesn't matter. But let's say we want to block certain social media sites, YouTube, etc. So again, we'll block social sites, we'll select from our kids network. And for a specific app, let's block YouTube Kids, sure. How about, is TikTok in here? Yes, it is. We can block TikTok, Snapchat. I don't even know all the apps, but you get the idea. So now you could set up a rule to block these forms of content. Again, you can set it all the time, on a schedule, etc. Now, let's say even that isn't working for you. What else can you do? Because believe it or not, the one thing you're going to have to keep in mind when setting this up is these systems are not foolproof. For example, I'll just pick on TikTok. I don't know. But let's say the TikTok app on a child's device is talking to a specific server on a specific port, right? That's effectively what's happening here. Is it knows how TikTok communicates and it's blocking that behind the scenes. If there's another way to access that, like maybe if they go to a web browser, that accesses TikTok through a different host and port. And if that's not captured in the TikTok rule, guess what? Your kids are going to be able to look at TikTok. And the reality is they're probably going to figure that out faster than these rules are updated. So unfortunately, this is not foolproof. It's something you really need to keep on top of. And worst case scenario, if none of these work for you, you can just go in and set your rule up to block a specific IP address or domain name. Right. And so you can get super granular on this and it can be a pain in the butt to manage. But that's what you got to do because they will find a way around it. And while I'm at it, let me talk about another way to kind of circumvent all of this that you need to be aware of. Now, I think you can set up a rule to block this, but I don't buy it. You're particularly savvy kids, you can get around all these rules just by running a VPN from their device. So if they have the ability to install VPN software on their PC, laptop, phone, whatever it is, they will create a tunnel from their device to the VPN server, and the UDM isn't going to see any of that, right? It's completely encrypted traffic, is not going to see it. And guess what? All these rules we just went through, you're completely out of luck. Almost. In particular, the rules for like content filtering, like blocking apps, websites, etc. Now, you can set up rules to block VPN traffic. So you can do, I think, tunneling and proxy services would do it. I haven't tested this, to be fair. I wouldn't just trust this. It's something you would need to check on and verify. So it takes work. Now, personally, I have been bitten by these rules more than once. And I don't mean like with the UDM, I mean in general. Just like rules not working exactly as you want, causing problems, people getting around them. It's just something you need to be aware of. And you need to kind of be aware of the ways to kind of work around these. And the other thing to call out is these can actually get in the way of kids being productive. So for their, like, to stop them from doing what you don't want them to do and enable them what you want them to do, you kind of need to check on it and be aware. So let me just kind of run back and I'll look at this rule where I have a bunch of games blocked. I have actually seen cases where I have had firewall rules set up to block certain pieces of content like YouTube or other things, and that has caused school applications to not work. And sometimes they fail in a very like odd way. So the application will like half work, or some pieces of content won't load, etc. You don't know what's going on. Like you may think like, oh my gosh, the website's broken, the school website is down, etc. And it can cause a lot of churn. So just be aware if something from the school isn't working, double check firewall rules and maybe even consider just turning them off for a little bit to see if that fixes the situation. Oh, and by the way, I did make one other comment on VPNs. So of course, if you do a full network block like this, that turns off network access at night to an entire network, that will solve your VPN problem. It's really more in the content filtering and content restriction piece that someone running a VPN on a local device will be able to work around it. Now, another way to do content filtering on the Dream Machine is to set up a custom DNS server for your children's network that will restrict apps. And you can also use it to restrict malicious content, which is great too, because that kind of dives into the general privacy space. But let me show you how to do that as well. So you go into networks, pick the network you want to configure, we'll say the kids network. And down here under manual, when you scroll down, you can see for this network, again, right? Kids network, all the kids' devices are attached to this. You can set custom DNS servers for this network. This will allow you to use different DNS servers for different networks in your house. And again, stepping back, a quick refresher on what DNS is doing. Imagine your kid is sitting at their computer and they go type in a website, like a website's name I won't say right here, but let's say it's a questionable website, right? Through the DNS system, what their computer is going to do is like, hey, I need the IP address of this questionable website, and it's going to reach out to another server to get that address. And in this case, it's going to reach out to the server sitting at 192.168.3.90 and say, hey, can you give me the IP address of this questionable website? And the server is going to come back and give it an answer, right? That's how, like when you're browsing the web or your kids are browsing the web, that's happening all the time. Usually, like if you're using a standard router, whatever your ISP provided, you're probably using a DNS server like Google. So all of your requests are going out to Google or one of these other things. And sure, it'll come back and it'll hand your kid's machine the IP address of the questionable website, and off they go. Imagine that could work a little differently. Imagine if when your kid goes out to that, tries to go to that website, if the server comes back and is like, I don't know the IP address, never heard of it, and it gets no answer, then your kid's browser won't be able to access any site. It won't go anywhere, so the request will fail. They won't be able to access the questionable content. So what you can do is you can set up custom DNS servers for your kids' network. Now here, I actually run a DNS server locally on Pi-hole. I'll show you that in a second, but that's getting super complicated. But one thing you could consider is there's a whole bunch of other free DNS options out there that have content filtering built into them. So I'll just show you one of them, and that's Cloudflare. So here is one option you can use, and you can set your DNS server to 1111, which is Cloudflare's DNS. Now, actually, if you read through this article, they actually have a number of other options. So they have a DNS server option for families. And so let me just read this. Since launching 1111, the number one request we have received is to provide a version of the product that automatically filters out bad sites. While 1111 can safeguard user privacy and optimize efficiency, it's designed to be fast, not for blocking or filtering content. Okay, great. So they've introduced it for families. It's an easy way to add a layer of protection for malware and adult content. So that's pretty cool. We'll keep going. And so here are their two options. We'll just jump down to the answer. And so malware blocking only is 111.2. If you want to block malware and adult content, you can do 111.3. So how would we implement this? We would just go back. We're like, hey, you know what? I want to block all malware and adult content on my kid's network. Type in 1113, hit apply, and off you're running. So what will happen is, imagine your kid's sitting at their computer. They try to go to a malicious, questionable website. It sends that request off to 111.3. It's like, give me the IP address for this questionable website. The Cloudflare server is going to look that up in their database. It's going to be like, oh, sorry, that's questionable. And it's not going to give them a response back. They won't be able to access the site. There you go. Long explanation, but we're not done yet. Now, of course, if you want to go even further, you can run, I'll cancel this. You can run your own DNS locally, which basically is nice from a privacy standpoint, since now this traffic is not leaving your house, and it gives you much more control over the lists of websites that are considered malicious or websites you want to block. That is probably a topic for a whole other video, but I just want to show you something real quick. So this is my Pi-hole instance, and actually the entire household goes through this. So I don't restrict it to just kids, like every network is using this. But I have all kinds of block lists in here for malicious content, everything else. But I think there's an interesting piece of data you should see. Look at the percentage blocked across the household. So think about like all the devices in the household making all these network queries, and this DNS server is blocking like 23% of them. That's crazy. One cool thing, and this is blocking ads too, by the way. So if I go to some news site, I have no ads. It doesn't, like, I get blank spots. It's really nice. You know, what's cool is obviously ads are blocked, malicious content is blocked. But the other nice thing is it speeds up your overall browsing, because for now, 23% of the requests, like, they don't do anything. They don't leave the house. They don't go anywhere. So that's traffic, which is you're not processing. So it's nice. But we'll leave that for another time. If you want to get super into it, running your own DNS server can be fun. Let's roll this back a bunch and kind of go back to where we started. We were talking about content filtering, and we were talking about how you can set the DNS server on your kid's network to enable content filtering, and showed a couple ways of doing that. I think a Cloudflare option is nice and easy and works well, so we will just leave it at that. Now, before we move on, like in kind of putting this together, I'm also talking about ways to kind of work around this. The kids will try to work around it, but let's just jump back to the Wi-Fi network section. Remember, we just went through a bunch of configuration that were network specific. So you can set up, we set up traffic rules that applied to the kids network. We looked at setting up DNS servers specific to the kids network, right? So, and then I said like, hey, VPNs are a way around this. Another way around this is if your kids can get access to one of your other networks. So if they can find out the password to one of these other networks and those don't have any restrictions placed on them, that's another way around. So just be aware of that. Maybe don't share their credentials or rotate them. And again, one other use case would be in the extreme edge case is if you have put a switch in or near your kids' rooms, if you use a wired connection, you probably want to go in and lock down the ports on the switch. Remember, when you do port configuration, we'll go over to port configurations and we will look at our big switch. Remember, you can say which of these, what network each port is on. So imagine you have a kid's machine, it's plugged into a port, that port is tagged to the kid's network. Everything I said just applies, life is good. But if there happens to be a switch that they can get easy access to where they can just plug into another port and that port is on a network with no restrictions, well, guess what? You have no restrictions and you'll be chasing that one down or not if they're quiet about it. So just something to think about, or maybe don't put a switch in a place which is easily accessible to them. All right, so that wraps up kind of our discussion on content restriction. Let's move on from here to just talk. We've kind of covered a lot of like how you set up parental controls on the UDM, but let's talk a little bit about just general privacy. So one option you have available to you is you can actually have the UDM connect to different VPN endpoints. So again, I don't know what whatever your thoughts are on the value of VPNs, like that's up to you. But you could have, like, if you're a NordVPN or name your VPN provider, you could even host your own VPN, right? If for some reason you wanted your traffic on from your kids' devices or your kids' network to be routed through a VPN connection, so they get a different IP address than you or whatever reason you want it obscured, you can actually set that up. And what you can do is you can go into settings, under the VPN configuration. I'm not going to kind of walk through how to doing this today, but you can set up a VPN client or many VPN clients. And then once the client is set up, you can go set up routing rules, which route different networks to the VPN. So you could basically set up a rule that routes your kid's network. In this case, you can see I have an IoT network and you can route that out to the VPN. It's an option you can explore if you want, probably super edge case, but just something to be aware of. Next up in the security tab, you can go in here and you can configure ad blocking right here. Remember I showed, I did the quick kind of walkthrough on Pi-hole and I said that's actually doing ad blocking. You can enable ad blocking for your entire network right here with this option. To be fair, I don't know how well it works. You can also set up country restrictions. So if you don't want traffic in and out of the house to specific countries, you can set those blocks up right here. And then also in the security tab, you can go into intrusion detection. This gets into a whole other topic of IPS and IDS, but you can turn on the dark web blocker and it'll block traffic encrypted by Tor if you have kids kind of starting to play around with that kind of thing. Again, this is more in kind of the general privacy if you're really on some of the edge cases of parental controls. Now, we're pretty much going to wrap it up here, but let me go back. I think we covered most of kind of how you set up parental controls, some of the gotchas and workarounds. And I'll say just in closing, the one use case I have never solved with the Dream Machine, and hopefully they'll add this in the future, is being able to do like time accounting. So remember when you look at rules like this, like, hey, let's block kids' games and you can schedule this and set between these hours, like that works fine. But imagine it's like, hey, I want to say that you only have access to the internet for 3 hours a day. Like there's no way to actually do that on here. You would have to manually kind of track that by hand and set the rules accordingly. So I think that's a gap in some of the functionality. But on the whole, like as you've seen through setting up these rules and managing very fine-grained rules and parts of the network, you can get very fine-grained in your parental controls and basically restricting access to content, networks, etc. Hope that was helpful. You're considering a Dream Machine. I hope this kind of helps inform you on what it can do in the parental space. So we will leave it here. If you have any questions or comments, drop them down below and we'll see you next time.